Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Shreve Memorial Library Virtual Author Chat. Shreve Memorial Library hosts the Virtual Author Chat each month. It's the first Thursday of each month at 6 p.m. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Martha Viator and her book, along with her colleagues, a book that she co-authored with her colleagues. The name of the book is Frantz Public School, A Story of Race, Resistance, Resiliency, and Recovery in New Orleans. And of course, Dr. Martha grew up right in the middle and watched a lot of changes in that particular school system. And she's here to tell us about it this evening. Dr. Martha. Dr. Martha, I think you're still muted.
Got it.
There we go.
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much for the introduction. I do need to make one little correction. I did not grow up in New Orleans, but I'm just down the road. So, and I do have a connection. So thank you so much. On behalf of my co-authors, Meg and Connie, thank you for the opportunity tonight to talk about this book about Frantz Public School. We are truly honored to share some of the stories that we learned as we researched the book. We are going to reserve some time at the end of the talk, so please, we invite questions and comments. We do want to hear from everyone. My co-authors and I are going to introduce ourselves and explain what got us interested in this project. So, as you know, I'm Martha Graham Viator, and that picture was before COVID. And so now I have gray hair. I don't know if you can see me, but I definitely decided no longer to color my hair. So, and it's long as well. So I apologize for that picture. Anyway, I did go to school from grades 4 through 12 in Lafayette. And I also went to the University of Southwestern Louisiana, where I majored in history. And so I jumped at this chance to work on this project because I did live through desegregation of schools here in Louisiana. When I was in 5th grade, the Lafayette Public Schools were ordered to desegregate in 1969. And so I, as someone who loves history, I wanted to know more about this story because you live through things and you don't really take it in, especially at such a young age of 4th grade or 5th grade. But I did leave the South for about 35 years, and I returned to Louisiana about a year and a half ago after I retired from teaching high school and college up in New Jersey at Rowan University. I supervised and prospective history teachers. So, history is in my blood. And so I was just really excited about this project. Meg, would you care to introduce yourself, please?
Meg, I think you're still muted.
I'm on this Zoom all day long, and I seem to every day make the mistake and have somebody say, you think you got into us. Anyway, good evening. My name is Meg White, and I hail from the Garden State of New Jersey, which is where I had the fortune, I should say, of working for 2 years at Rowan University, which is where I met Martha. This book for me really came from the fact that this school kept popping up into my life in many ways. I'm stealing Connie's thunder a little bit, that in the first book that Connie and I wrote together, we used the story of Ruby Bridges and her teacher, Barbara Henry, at the end of the book to talk a little bit about cognitive dissonance and such. And really my story of my connection is I had a student who graduated from my teacher education program and went on to work for Teach for America in Louisiana. And she came back to visit me after her first several months down there to tell me what the experience was. And I said to her, I said, you know, I don't know anything about New Orleans, but just out of curiosity, where in the city are you? And she said, I'm in the 9th Ward. She said, I'm in a school called William Frantz Public School. And it was just one of those things like, why does this keep coming up for me? And that sort of led us to, maybe there's an article in this. And so we started to do some research, and the more we read and the more we researched, the more we recognized that this was a story that needed telling. Connie, I know I stole your thunder, but I'll let you maybe pick it up from there.
Thanks, Meg. I'm Connie Schaffer, and I live in Nebraska, so I am far afield from Louisiana. But like Meg said, we used the story of William Frantz, or stories within William Frantz, as part of a case study in a earlier book we wrote, excuse me, and it just kept coming up every time I would look at something. This school surfaced in some way, shape, or form, similar to what Meg said. And for about 2 or 3 years, we just thought it was a really interesting story. And we resisted going beyond that, and finally came to the realization that this wasn't our story to tell, but the stories were there, little stories were there, and someone needed to connect the dots between the stories. There were great pieces about the 1960s and civil rights, and there were great pieces about Katrina, and there was some pieces in between, but no one had connected the dots. And so we thought, although this is the story of New Orleans and the people of New Orleans should tell that story, we're just connecting the dots, and looked at documents that contain these stories and put them all together. So
Wow.
that's how I came into this, I guess. And so I'm going to just start and get us rolling, and then turn it back over to Martha, who's going to do the most of this. But I'm hoping you all can see not that screen. You don't want to see that screen. You're seeing my screen with the blocks of color on the bottom. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, so this is a little preview of what we'll cover tonight. As the title of the book suggests, there's some themes within the book, and they correspond roughly to some markers in time. So race, resistance, resiliency, and recovery. The book actually starts when the school opened in 1938. And like many schools, it just had this nondescript existence in the neighborhood that it was in. Of course, the Brown decision in 1954 marked a significant transition for all of public education, trying to move it past the separate but equal practices toward school desegregation. And so the shift in colors on the screen shows that that really significant shift in all of public education. For William Frantz Public School, and really all of Orleans Parish schools, this didn't occur until 1960, so 6 years after the Brown ruling. And so that is a significant shift, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Of course, Hurricane Katrina represents a monumental event for all of New Orleans, and a lot of things happened between 1960 and 2005, and we talk about those in the book, and we'll talk about them tonight. And then we'll end really with where the school is now, and we'll talk a little bit about Achilles Academy, which is the charter school that is now housed in the building that was known as William Frantz Public School. So that just gives you a little bit of an outline of where we're headed tonight.
Okay.
So before we start talking about what's in the book, I want to talk just a little bit about our approach to the book. And so there's a little bit of an excerpt there on the screen from the introduction. We recognize that we're 3 white women, and that demographic impacts our perspective on the story. As we uncovered these stories, we also were very cognizant that language and the use of language and terms varied over time and varied between demographic books. So we struggled with that a little bit, but for consistency and impact, we made some decisions about the words we choose to use in this book. And just a couple of examples, we chose to capitalize the terms white and black because so much of the social context around the history of the school was based on skin color. We also chose to use the word desegregation versus integration. Those terms are used interchangeably even during the civil rights movement and beyond that. We chose to use desegregation because so many of the efforts, particularly in the earlier years, were focused on physically bringing Black children into white schools or schools with white children. But there really wasn't an effort to afford those Black students any sort of equal representation or influence in those schools. So we use desegregation versus integration. And, you know, unfortunately, true integration remains an ongoing challenge in many schools yet today. And so given that overview and context, we'll get into the book a little bit. Like previously, I had said that William Frantz opened in 1938, so about 16 years before the Brown ruling, and just over 20 years before Ruby Bridges was allowed to enroll in the school in 1960. And so this next slide is just a couple of excerpts from the book, and they're taken from the summer right before, or the period right before 1960, when there was this build up to school desegregation. So post Brown, but pre Ruby Bridges in 1960. So Meg, do you want to just read those excerpts quickly? You're on mute, Meg.
I'm having trouble with my screen right now because I can't see the entire thing. So I'm trying to open up the PowerPoint. So if you could read that one while I open up the PowerPoint so I can read from there.
You bet. So the excerpt says, Thurgood Marshall, like William Aubert and Leontine Goins Luke and many others in New Orleans' Ninth Ward, knew the existing school segregation systems resulted in educational discrepancies too numerous, too substantial, and too consequential to be ignored. So this quote shows that there was a lot of activity around school desegregation long before Ruby Bridges and the three other girls entered the schools in New Orleans. And there was a concerted effort by activists in the community to address the inequities in schools as well as housing. The next excerpt says, Leander Perez embodied the position of Southern segregationists and combined this with substantial legislative acumen and relentless disdain for the federal government. The White Citizens Council declared desegregation in New Orleans would equate to, quote, dropping an atomic bomb on every school in Louisiana, end quote, and told the crowd to prepare for war. So like I said, that first excerpt alludes to what happened in New Orleans, kind of simultaneously with the Brown case. There was a case, Bush v. New Orleans, that actually came to be before Brown, but they pulled that case back at the request of the NAACP so that the Brown case could be the single case moving forward in the federal judicial system. But Louisiana and the folks in New Orleans were well engaged and involved in addressing school segregation at the same time. The second excerpt shows the resistance to this. The White Citizens Council really used rhetoric to just sort of whip up this frenzy around school desegregation. And you know, that there were so many actions that were taken to prevent or impede the process of school desegregation in Louisiana. It went on for years, but really culminated in the summer of 1960. Finally, the federal court stepped in and made it clear that Orleans Parish would need to desegregate its schools, and that needed to happen in 1960. And so while the White Citizens Council was whipping up this fury and, declaring the dangers of desegregating schools, there was really a conversation within the New Orleans community And it became focused on two questions. Does New Orleans want to close schools and avoid or protest federal desegregation? That was one question. Or the second question, does New Orleans want to open schools but limit desegregation? And what was driving that conversation was, for many people, economics. They wanted to avoid a similar situation to what had happened in Little Rock when they closed the schools and there were lots of economic fallout. So ultimately, Orleans Parish School Board chose to say, okay, we're going to concede that we have to desegregate our schools, but we're going to do it in a very limited way. And even after they made that decision, they successfully used the courts to delay desegregation until November. So it didn't start in August when the schools started, but rather in November. So finally, on November 14th, 1960, Ruby Bridges entered William Frantz Public School, and 3 other first grade Black students entered McDonough 19. As you can see by the editorial headline here, many saw this as a regrettable concession and did not embrace desegregation. And most people are pretty familiar with the images of the protesters outside of the building. The situation was volatile, the sentiments were overt, there were threats of violence, acts of violence against Bridges and her family, as well as some of the other folks that continued to send their students to the school. That, of course, precipitated the intervention of federal marshals who accompanied Bridges to and from school and offered protection for some of the other folks in school too. And the next excerpt is going to highlight the national media attention that was focused on the school. Now, there were 2 schools that were integrated, William Frantz Public School and McDonough 19. There was much less attention on the 3 girls at McDonough 19. Perhaps because there were 3 of them and there was only 1 student at William Frantz Public School. That's one explanation. But what most people believe is that there weren't the protests outside McDonough 19 because the white community completely boycotted the school. They withdrew every white child from the school. And so it was only those 3 girls in the building. The difference at William Frantz Public School was there was a handful of white families who continued to send their children to the school. And many feel like the protesters were targeting, trying to influence those white families, just making it so uncomfortable for them that they would withdraw their children, thus having a complete boycott and sending this message that no one would desegregate the schools in Orleans Parish. So the next excerpts here, Meg, are you able to see them and read them now? Go ahead.
Bridges entered Frantz Public School, and the school entered into the living rooms and collective psyche of millions of Americans. Heinous racism, the ism that had incessantly preyed upon the city and citizens of New Orleans, now focused its steely attention on the fortress of democracy, public education, and specifically Frantz Public School. It did so with such intensity, it surprised both its victims and its perpetrators, as well as those who, for decades, chose quiet complacency and self-declared neutrality over justice and equality.
Thanks, Meg. So like it says, the eyes of the world were focused on William Frantz Public School, and it really became an iconic symbol and part of the civil rights movement. And the images of Bridges and the school appeared everywhere in newspapers across the country and really across the world. Both John Updike and John Steinbeck, 2 Pulitzer Prize winning authors, wrote about the school. And even 4 years later, the school is still in the gathering attention. Norman Rockwell's painting, The Problem We All Live With, appeared in Look magazine. And this further cemented the role of the school in the collective memory of Americans. And even if you go beyond this time frame, the school just continues to become part of the civil rights story in various ways in the American saga. There are several children's books written about it, including one by Ruby Bridges. There was a Disney movie about it, so that legacy just kept building. So I'm going to turn things over to Martha now, and she's going to take us through most of the content of the book. So Martha, I'll let you go from here.
Thank you so much, Connie. So I want to just kind of reiterate what Connie went over earlier. This is a slide we've already seen, but the title of the book includes those 4 themes, and those themes are also going to frame our talk tonight. Obviously, race undergirds everything in this book. And Connie has already given you some examples of a very overt resistance to desegregation, but I want to delve a little bit more deeply into that. So the next slide, just to remind you of, this is really overt resistance, trying to prevent Ruby Bridges from going to school, and the fact that she has, federal marshals protecting her, that was even necessary is a really great example of overt resistance. But we're gonna look at some other examples. So Meg, would you please read that?
Certainly. No longer able to avoid sending their children to desegregated public and parochial schools in Orleans Parish, many white families separated themselves from Black families by moving. Superintendent Dulce initiated the district's initial and perfunctory efforts to desegregate the faculty in 1966. More than 5 years since student desegregation began, many white teachers still opposed it, especially within the high schools.
Thanks, Meg. So these are just 2 examples of a variety of resistance we uncovered in this story. Some families who could afford it left the city and moved to surrounding parishes. And they did so over the years following 1960. Although this was gradual, as we're going to see in a few minutes. And the reason that it was gradual is that the courts approved the district's desegregation plan that allowed the district to add 1 grade per year. So it would be nearly a decade before even the 1st grade in high school, 9th grade, would be desegregated. I think it ended up taking like 12 years. The result of this resistance in the form of white flight left a population in the city that was increasingly Black, but also increasingly poor. And this is because the economy in not just New Orleans, but all over the country, was undergoing a shift, a very gradual shift. And it really started right after World War II. And so, many factories that slowly closed down, people that had these jobs could not find another job because the factories were leaving the city. So it was really hard for them to find jobs. The other excerpt, the second one, shows the resistance within the system of education in New Orleans. In our research, we found a survey that was commissioned by the school board, and we found this survey in the Orleans Parish School Board archives. And this survey revealed that white teachers were not comfortable with an integrated faculty. And the survey also revealed that white teachers did not believe that their Black colleagues were qualified to teach white students. So clearly, desegregation was not going to be easy to achieve. Now, this next slide shows snapshots of there we go, of the district's student enrollment by race. And it really highlights this resistance in the form of white flight. And I'm going to take a few minutes to really look at this. So you can see that the number of Black students in the district that were enrolled there is in blue, and the kind of goldish color represents the number of white students. And so the enrollment did not peak until 1970, but you can see already from 1960 to 1970 that the number of white students is declining. And that was, as I said, because the desegregation plan was gradual, and that's why it did take that long. And it was fairly small, but look at that drop off in 1975. And I didn't include all the years because it would have been too small to see, but you can see that starting in 1970, the number of Black students enrolled in the district all the way to 2000 is pretty steady. And then obviously in 2005, we see a tremendous decline because of Katrina. And then you can see, to me, it's kind of surprising that it's pretty steady from 2005 to 2015. I guess it shouldn't be surprising because it did take a long time for the city to rebuild. But look at the big increase there in 2020. So, the city definitely, the enrollment in the city schools is picking up. I also just want to point out that we did include in the post-Katrina numbers other students, that little gray bar, to show that the increasing numbers of Black and Hispanic and Asian students. So, as I said, this graph really shows the white flight. I think it's very clear. In the next slide, there we go. Meg, could you read that excerpt?
Sure. In 1985, the Times-Picayune published Cheating Our Children, a 15-day series on education. The powerful Sunday front page launch of the series failed to address how problems external to the school might be impacting education. While many New Orleans teachers described the struggles their students faced outside school, later articles also quoted Orleans Parish administrators who attributed the school's challenges to the lack of support, welfare dependency, and a quote, something for nothing mentality, end quote, of parents.
Thanks, Meg. This excerpt indicates the resistance by institutions and authorities to acknowledge the students' perspectives and needs. Administrators, the last sentence really illustrates or indicates to me that administrators were too quick to blame the lack of some students' success on factors that they believed that they either couldn't or shouldn't try to address. And this newspaper series only reinforced the public's attitude that really all the problems in the schools boil down to the students and their parents. But not everyone on the board, the school board, was willing to accept this. Just a few years later, in 1988, the district conducted one of the first in the country Black achievement gap studies. And they appointed a task force to really delve into this and research this. And they found that the district, just as a whole, relied heavily on the discretion of teachers to deal with relatively minor classroom misbehaviors. And we're going to see this in some of the findings in this next slide. So I think this graph here, this was taken from the numbers that was produced in the report that the task force came up with. And what the task force did, one of the things they did is they looked at practices in the classroom by teachers and administrators, and how did that impact Black male students in the 1980s. So the first bar there represents the percentage of students that are Black are represented in blue, and all other students are in orange. So that might be white males, it might be Black and white females, like everybody else. So the blue throughout this entire graph represents Black males. So we can see that for the total enrollment, that under 50%, about 45% of all students in New Orleans were in the public schools were Black. But to see how the actions of the teachers and administrators impacted Black males, I'm going to ask you to look at bar number 4, and that's the suspensions. So the percentage of suspensions represented by Black males is well over 50%. I would say about 60%. And that is really out of whack with the percentage of students that were Black that are enrolled in the district, which is below 50%. This the effect of these practices, taking actions, really shows up in the number of expulsion, or the percentage of expulsions. So of all expulsions in the 1980s in New Orleans, well over 75% of them were Black males. So as I said, that really brought home to the task force, how the schools were dealing with Black males. Another thing that the task force did is that they surveyed teachers, and they actually interviewed a number of students. And what they found is that the students said that teachers didn't have very high expectations for them, for the Black students. They said that they didn't challenge them in class. They said that they didn't expect that they were going to graduate from high school, much less go on to college. And the survey really seemed to bear that out, because 60% of the teachers did not believe, at least they indicated, they did not believe that the Black students would go to college. So I think that just really shows, it's another example of a less overt example of resistance. Now, in a minute, we're going to look at the resiliency of parents and students and those who were committed to the progress of desegregation and certainly of equity. But I want to set the stage in the 1990s, because we just finished, this slide here talks about the 1980s. So we've already seen in the previous slide declining enrollment. And we've seen in here an inability for the system to really address the increasing special needs of students that were enrolled in New Orleans. And in the face of those problems, the city and the state decreased funding for New Orleans public schools. But despite these challenges, the teachers and the students at William Frantz showed great resilience. So Meg, if you would read this slide here.
Inside the building, dedicated Frantz Public School teachers worked to support the academic and social needs of their students. They offered special programs, such as a regularly occurring Black History Soul Bowl and partnered with community organizations to sponsor a Say Yes science program. On Saturday mornings, a group of teachers met with girls from the school as part of the school's drug-free campaign.
I think that that's one of my favorite excerpts in the entire book, because I just cannot imagine the 1990s, all the things that are going on, and people are giving up their Saturdays to work with kids and to make sure that these children can learn. Connie, could you give us the next slide? At this time, it's the 1990s now, Ruby Bridges began to care for her nieces after the death of her brother. So it just so happens that her nieces were already enrolled in William Frantz Public School. And so as she walked these girls every day to the school, up those stairs, the very walk that she took every day 30 years prior to that, this prompted Ruby Bridges to volunteer as a liaison between the school and the parents. The work of Ruby Bridges to provide support to families is another example of the incredible resiliency of this neighborhood. Even with these efforts at William Frantz and the efforts of other schools in New Orleans, the district faced a variety of financial scandals in the 2 decades before Katrina. Meg?
The level of corruption shocked the residents of New Orleans and left a seasoned FBI agent in disbelief. Quote, "Some of the things that have been presented to me, and I've been in this business 30 years, I just can't believe are occurring. What we are seeing is people who have children in these same schools stealing from them and depriving children," end quote.
Thanks, Meg. The front page here on the right reveals a payroll scandal in 2003. But as the FBI agent says, there were many more. And I'm just going to give you some of them. We don't have time for all of them. Some of these scandals included insurance fraud, the superintendent and other high-ranking school officials using school employees to work on their homes before hurricanes or storms, or maybe to fix things that had happened around the house. Other scandals included administrators using or inflating attendance rates to improve their school performance scores. And then in one particularly bad scandal was a dereliction of duty by the transportation department, leaving, not doing what they were supposed to do. And so these are just some of the ways that the district failed and actually stole from the students. So in the midst of all of this corruption, Connie, can you advance the slides? Thank you. Can it be a surprise that the city's students did not perform well? So this is the report card in 2005 for William Frantz Public School. And this came out in the spring before Katrina, so spring of 2005. And admittedly, they did not, William Frantz did not do very well. The first bar that's shaded in green and white represents the scores of the students at the school. The middle bar in each of these graphs is the school, the district, Orleans Parish, and then the gold one is the state. So you can see that their scores were concerning. But I mean, can you imagine when you open up this report card, you're a parent, you're the teachers, and you see that bottom line, your school is academically unacceptable. And so it was just so disheartening. Um, s- so at this very moment, it's the spring of 2005. All of this is going on. We have something else going on. There we go. Meg, can you read that?
Frantz Public School found itself on two very significant lists, juxtaposing the current academic underperformance within the building and the historic legacy represented in its renowned outer facade. The district placed Frantz on the list of schools to be closed, while the National Register of Historic Places simultaneously listed the building as a protected site. Bolstered and protected by its history, Frantz refused to capitulate to the ravages of neglect, poverty, deteriorating neighborhoods, accountability measures, academic labels, incompetence, corruption, mismanagement, and in the next months, Mother Nature.
So as we all know, just months later, in August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina ravaged the Gulf Coast. So this is an image taken from a classroom at William Frantz after the hurricane. And it's bad, but it was even worse because for years, the school board had deferred maintenance and maintenance programs and things, fixing the school up. And so the result was that the right after Katrina, the estimates for the repairs were placed at over $5.5 million. But even despite all of this damage, the building continued to stand as a prominent feature of the neighborhood. The only two-story building that was surrounded by single-story homes. And this illustrates the resiliency of this incredible building. We're going to take a look at the recovery after the storm, but first I want to set the stage, or I'm going to have Meg set the stage.
Okay. Both the Orleans Parish School Board and Recovery School District seemed to forget about Frantz Public School, but that did not matter, as there was little need for expediency to repair Frantz and ready it for classes. Few students remained in the neighborhoods surrounding the school, and all of the school's teachers had been fired. Charter school advocates, insensitive to, or at the least oblivious to the role of neighborhood schools like Frantz, pushed to rapidly advance the opportunity to reframe public education. Once the waters receded, the school remained fenced off from the street. There it waited, silent and alone. Surely help would come.
And in fact, ultimately the building did recover, but it would take almost a decade. Achilles Academy, which is a charter school, would eventually open in the William Frantz building, but like many other charter schools in New Orleans, Achilles had struggled to find a permanent home after the storm. And when it opened, nearly all of Achilles Academy's teachers were from Teach for America or Teach NOLA and grew up outside of New Orleans. And so they didn't know the culture of the city, much less the neighborhood. But finally, in 2013, Achilles Academy moved into the renovated William Frantz building and held a ribbon cutting ceremony on those very famous steps to the original entrance. The door with William Frantz Public School inscribed above, as you can see in the picture on the left. However, today that entrance is not the main entrance. The main entrance we see here on the right. And so this is part of the new part of the building. And it has this plastic banner that identifies the school that is in there, Achilles Academy. But it's below the permanent letters that read William Frantz School. And that marks those permanent letters mark the school's historic legacy. I'm going to hand this back to Connie, who's going to provide some concluding remarks before we take questions.
Thanks, Martha. I wish there were time to tell more of these stories to you because there's so many, but hopefully we've hit some highlights. 2020, of course, marked the 60th anniversary of the desegregation of the William Frantz building. And the story still garners national and international attention. We wrote just a really short, like 500 or so words synopsis of the book for the conversation. And that was printed on November 14th, 2020. So the 60th anniversary. And that piece had over 18,000 readers in just a very short period of time. So people still recognize the picture. They still recognize the story. They're still interested in the story. And in fact, the story, that same story that we wrote was published in the Washington Post just a few days later. And they accompanied it with a picture, of course, of Rockwell's famous painting and Ruby Bridges' mother, Lucille Bridges, who just recently passed away. She's standing by the picture, and that's the photo that was in the Washington Post. And, so with that, we're curious about what the story means to you. Or if you have any questions about the story. Like I said, we've only just brushed the surface of what's in the book, but hopefully we've given you a sense of sort of the sequence of the story. So I'll turn it over to anybody who wants to ask questions.
Sam, do we have any questions in the comment boxes? Well, I guess I will get a question kicked off.
Hello.
Go ahead. Sounds like
Can
we've
you all
got.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I apologize. I came on late. Did you give any biographical information on why the school was named by the person that it was named after?
So that's interesting. We did quite a bit of research, and it took us a lot of time to find anything out about William Frantz himself. And Connie, correct me if I'm wrong, we learned that he was a school board member. He owned a jewelry store. He was a jeweler in town. What am I forgetting?
Yeah, he was a jeweler, quite prominent citizen in the community, and a long-serving member of the Orleans Parish School Board. And he himself has a really interesting personal story that we didn't get into in the book, but he definitely had a legacy at that time in the 1930s in New Orleans. That has since faded. It was hard to uncover that one.
And and not to hog the questions, let me ask this while I have you all. What citizen population was the original school designed for?
That's a really good question too. The housing areas in that particular part of New Orleans were built up really right before World War II and World War II, and they were designed, they were segregated, a Black housing area and a white housing area. William Frantz Public School was in the white area, and it was designed for white students. The equivalent school, not equivalent, but what they saw as the school for Black children was Lockett Elementary. It wasn't too far away, and that building no longer is standing, but that is the building that Ruby Bridges attended and would have continued to attend had she not been able to enroll in William Frantz Public School.
Can I add one thing to that? Our book opens in chapter 1 with something I'd like to read to you, sir, because this might be of interest to you. We start the book by saying William Frantz Public School, quote, a protection for democracy and, quote, a fortification against encroachment of those terrible isms. The speakers proclaimed these exact words at the school's dedication ceremony in September 1938. And the Orleans Parish School Board president predicted the school would be a kingdom of learning in which children would be taught right from wrong. That is directly from the speech that they gave at the opening of the school.
A kingdom of learning. I like that.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, the children would be taught right from wrong.
Doctor, you also stated that you watched the rise of charter schools, which I believe everything is pretty much still on that, same playing field today. Can you see where we might be headed with that even today?
Wow, that's a question I think we all ask ourselves most every day. There are conflicting reports that have been conducted over the last 15 years on the success or failures of charter schools. We do delve into some of the problems that we see with charter schools. It's supposed to be, choice for parents, but sometimes, many times, the students don't get into the school that their first choice. Also, there's transportation issues. I don't know. I think in New Orleans, it seems to have such a strong hold right now. And until parents feel like it's not serving them, then perhaps things might change. I don't know. Connie, Meg?
Yeah, there's a lot of, discussion about, do charter schools improve school desegregation? Do they make schools more segregated or less segregated? What I can tell you is Achilles Academy now is almost completely segregated. I believe it has like 98 or even higher percentage of its students are Black students. And so it has led to the resegregation of that school. Now, you might be able to find other examples that are different than that, but in this case, it's definitely segregated the school.
Wow. This is an incredible story. Do you feel that you'll do some more research as the years progress and see where we are, I guess, 10, 15 years from now?
What's interesting is that as we all sort of hinted at in the beginning, what led us to this story so significantly was that the school kept coming back to us in so many ways. But the other thing was that I think in general, when we try to understand segregation and desegregation, and we try to understand white flight and redlining and the impact that all those things had on communities, that you have to understand the whole story. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, you can't just pull, people have written about Katrina and they've written about the charter schools pre and post, but to really understand why that happened, you have to see the whole story, right? And I remember people asking me what surprised me the most about my research, about all of this that we did. And I said, I am not by any means, as an educator my whole life and a teacher educator for the last 15 years, I am not at all an advocate for charter schools. That's as politely as I can make that statement. But my point is, what surprised me the most in this research is understanding why in New Orleans they made these decisions to go to charter schools. I don't agree with them necessarily, but I understand why. And it really comes from understanding the 20 years prior to Katrina and the corruption that happened and all of that. And so to me, to look at what happens beyond 2018, which is basically where we ended the story, that's going to be another story itself. because in order to understand the next decisions, you have to understand what led to all of those decisions in the first place, taking politics out of it completely. I think that may be a greater story, but probably not in my lifetime to tell.
Are there any other questions?
I think this gentleman.
Yes. When was the last class at William Frantz School?
The spring of 2005.
Yeah, they
Okay.
actually closed the school in the fall of 2005. So that very first week of school, there were no students in the building. They had shifted them and the teachers to another building. And of course, it was only those few days of school before the Katrina hit. But that was so really, yeah, spring of 2004 would have been like sort of the last year that anyone finished at William Frantz Public School.
And the highest grade was 8th grade?
Yes.
Was 8th grade?
Mhm.
Has anybody done any follow-up study on those graduates?
Well, that is a great question and suggestion too. One of the things we're hoping to do is now go back and find individuals to interview and sort of add that personalized individual story along the timeline of the school. And so it's interesting that you say that, because I've been doing some research on trying to find some students who attended that school.
Wonderful. Okay, ladies, give us some final remarks. We're going to get
I
wrapped
think
up
this
here.
gentleman had one more question.
Okay, we got one more question. Go ahead.
What about the follow-up of any educators who maybe spent 5, 10, or 15 years at school?
Yeah, that's definitely on our list of people we want to try to find. Absolutely. We think that the teachers, the principals, all those kinds of people. So maybe even parents. There is a neighborhood association that is still in existence. I don't know when they started, but we figure that that some of those people might lead us to some of those names. So we're working on that.
One of the challenges in doing that, though, is that after Hurricane Katrina, the Orleans Parish School Board fired close to 7,000 teachers and staff members, and most of them were not ever rehired when the schools reopened as charter schools. And many of those teachers just left the area. They left the state, going elsewhere and seeking teaching jobs, because they weren't going to get their jobs back in New Orleans. So that makes it a little more challenging that there aren't as many people left in the neighborhoods that were there.
The other thing too is that so many of the records of the school district were destroyed. They were not, they were in the process of centralizing some of their records, but didn't have that complete at the time of Katrina. So now the Orleans Parish School Board records are housed at the University of New Orleans in the Louisiana Special Collections. But what happened is they just tried to retrieve as much material as they could from individual buildings and schools. And so while there is a lot of information, some of it is destroyed and difficult to read, and much of it is uncatalogued. We actually found the actual telegram, the rice paper telegram from President Eisenhower to the school superintendent in an unmarked, uncatalogued cardboard box sitting on a shelf in the records. And so if anybody has a lot of time on their hands and is ambitious, you could probably go to the Louisiana Special Collections and look through a lot of cardboard boxes.
Well, let me ask you maybe 2 last questions. I promise I'll stop after that. Since the building is an historical site, is it being preserved, and is it used for community events, community activities, things like that, to just appreciate its structure and its historical significance?
So of course, they were forced to renovate the building. They couldn't let it, fall in disrepair, although they took their time getting it fixed. The building is used as Achilles Academy. They do use that portion of the building, that it's not just all in the in the new section. And there is actually a bronze statue of Ruby Bridges, which is hard to see, but it is over by where the old playground would have been. Connie and Meg got a chance to go through the building and I did not, so I'm going to defer to them.
So there's inside the school, in the classroom that Ruby attended, outside, there's a plaque that identifies it as this is the classroom that Ruby Bridges attended. And then inside the classroom, all around the top, there are different quotes. I think several, right, Connie, from Ruby herself. So there is that historical mark that this was the classroom where she attended. And again, that's in the old building upstairs. It seems the majority of the activity in the new building is where the students attend the school.
Yeah, they restored the original parts of the building with period pieces, period furniture, wooden flooring, but they had to replace almost everything. Interestingly, McDonough 19 has not been renovated, but the 3 girls who attended that building have started a foundation, and they are intending to renovate that building and use it as a community center civil rights museum.
Now, when I came on, I heard a concept that's new to me. I mean, it's not new to me because I know it's been practiced in different forms, but the statement was made that Ruby Bridges coordinated a parent liaison at the school.
Right.
I've never heard, parental involvement phrased that way. So what do you have a meaning of that?
There was a lot of things going on in the neighborhood that were actually quite negative at that time. And so there wasn't an awful lot about it. Connie, do you remember?
Yeah, that is actually the title that they gave her at the school, but there was some pretty significant disengagement of the parents, and probably part of that rested on the school and the school's inability to connect with the parents in relevant and meaningful ways. And so I think they had the hope was that Ruby Bridges could be that liaison. She was a recognizable figure, and she then had young children, her nieces, in the school. So I think they were just hoping that she could bridge this gap between the school, the teachers in the school, and the parents and the families in the community. Her brother was killed in some violence in the neighborhood, and later on, her son also was killed in this part of New Orleans, also in drug-related violence.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been an incredible story. And we meet the first Thursday of every month right here on Zoom at 6 o'clock with a different author. We enjoyed you ladies this afternoon. Incredible story. Where can we find this book?
That's a great question. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it through the publisher, Peter Lang Publishing. It is available in hardcover and a paperback, and we have a Kindle version available as well. And we would love for you to read it and write a review on Amazon for us. We're trying during a pandemic to sell a book, that we can't sell at conferences and things like that where we would normally do so. So certainly welcome the opportunity, and thank you so much for allowing us to speak to all of you tonight. Martha, I don't want to steal your goodbye thunder, but I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I would just say thank you for your time and your interest. And it is an amazing story. And we were just lucky enough to try to put it on a few pages and tie it all together.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to echo that and thank you. When you have this recording on that last slide, we do have my email address. If anybody does have any further questions, or maybe all of our email addresses, we also have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So please, if any of you do those things, please go follow us.
Wow. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got a Kindle, of course, you can find it on Overdrive right at Shreve Memorial
Oh, there
Library.
you go.
We have enjoyed this evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we thank you and good night.
Good night.